Hi, welcome. Well, it's Tuesday, April 3rd. I don't know about you, but as we continue to read through Judges, I get the feeling I'm in a soap opera. The characters seem to come and go. The plot is ever twisting and turning. Today we have Abimelech, who comes to power in a violent way, trying to exercise his tyrannical rule, thinking of himself as some supreme ruler over the entire land. Ultimately he meets his end as well. And that seems to be the pattern here, going back and forth. Um, to me it's interesting because what we seem to find out as we've been going through the Old Testament here is that in reality, due to sin, men seem prone to stray from the straight and narrow, so to speak. Uh, and I think what we see is that not only do they tend to, but we're finding out that they do it even more readily when there are not godly men and women who are there to lead and guide. And that's a pattern that seems to play out down through history. And so I think it's important for us to remember that. And it brought me to the point of thinking about that and leading to this whole idea of all these idols and false gods that the Canaanites were following and that the children of Israel started to become enamored with. And I found a wonderful reference that kind of lists some of them for you, and I thought it would be good to kind of go through those because so much of what we're hearing here in the Old Testament is about God wanting his people to trust in him, to worship him, to avoid those other gods. And the Israelites struggled with that. And there must be something to that, beyond just the fact that we're sinful. I think there's a rebellious nature in us. But what else is it about these pagan gods, these idols that the people build, that makes them so attractive? And I was thinking in terms of the first, being made in the image of God. We're going to worship something. God made us that way. So we have this desire, number one, to worship something. And it can, and we know, of course, that it can only be filled by a deep personal relationship with God through Jesus Christ. But I think in general, when it comes to idols and some of these false gods, there's this desire to harness some sort of supernatural power in order to accomplish some sort of personal goal in the life of a person, and that seems to get played out over and over. Um, and I think we'll see that here in a moment when I describe some of these gods. But I think the reason it becomes attractive then is because idolatry allows us to create something or put something or someone together that we can worship, so to speak. And in essence, it removes those uncomfortable aspects about God himself, his perfect knowledge, his total power, his moral demands upon our lives. We can take those away and worship an idol. And in that way, we get rid of our God need by placing it into something that we have created, and ultimately that we hopefully control. And so that's why I think there's this tendency. It becomes more comfortable. It becomes more self-serving, and that kind of brings me here to a listing as the children of Israel in the land of Canaan. What were those gods? We've heard of a couple of them, but there are others as well. And so let me just go through them real quick. Number one, of course, is Baal. Baal was the most popular Canaanite god. He was the son of Ai, the high god, and every region in Canaan had a Baal to worship of some sort. And the Canaanites believed that Baal was able to control the changing seasons, and therefore he was the one that you really wanted to worship because he could provide for you a good crop, which is what, of course, people in those days desperately needed each and every year. He would send the rain. And so to do that, they would have ceremonies to try and entice Baal to respond. And they had priests who danced about the altar, chanting, many times cutting themselves with knives, hoping to somehow attract Baal's attention. And So the Baal priests taught that he was responsible for plagues and misfortunes. So not only did he bring about the produce, but he also could punish as well. So we have Baal on that hand, and the other one that comes to mind is Asherah or Ashtaroth. And Asherah is basically the female counterpart to Baal. And what you would do with Baal would be some sort of sacrifice. We ended up with human sacrifices, ultimately. And in fact, those sacrifices involved children in many times. With Asherah, we find that Canaanite women had to offer cuts from their hair or their chastity in many times. And you have these two gods playing off of one another, and so you basically had temple prostitutes who were available, and that sexual love and fertility was seen as a big part of getting Baal to produce in the spring, and so you'd have these fertility rites to make that happen. A couple of other gods in that area. Moloch was the Phoenician god of human sacrifice, and at times Moloch's idol welcomed children into his searing arms, and there would be a heated statue of Moloch, and they would place children on there. There was also Dagon. Dagon was the Philistines' national god. There were numerous temples to Dagon throughout Canaan, and we have this idea that at least historians do, that Dagon worship really started in Babylon and was carried over throughout Canaan. So we have 4 different gods, and of course there were many others, but the reality is, nonetheless, they were all idols. They were all false gods. They were there to replace the one God. They were there to be something that could be created and controlled, and in the end to give people what they wanted. Now, when the Israelites forgot whose children they were, clearly there was no shortage of substitutes for them to follow, and follow they did. So you have this soap opera continuing back and forth. Now, one final point that I would make here today, and I think this is the good news in all of this, is that thankfully, even though the children of God down through history, people have tried to rewrite the script in the soap opera, with evil always resident there, trying to create it in their own way. Even with all that going on, there is the one God of the universe who would not be denied. He is in charge. He sees his plans through to the cross and beyond, and I think that's the good news today. In a sense, he lets us go for a time, but then he squashes it, and of course that was the case for Abimelech, ultimately by having a woman throw a millstone off a tower and hitting him on the head. So the reality is, as I close here, is we worship a God that we neither created nor do we control. And I guess for that, we ought to stand up and shout, "Thank you." Praise the Lord. Have a great day.